on South Bay. Yeah.
Yep, that's good. That's good. Hope there's no more.
I do too. I do too. Yeah.
So far, we only have ready to go.
Chairman Cox, we are ready when you are.
Okay. We'll call this Monday, August 10th, 2020 meeting of the San Diego County Board of Supervisors to order. Today, we're going to be hearing a presentation from our staff on our budget for 2021. And we're going to have a staff presentation on that budget before we get into public comment. But in order to get started, I'm going to ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Thank you, Chairman Cox. Before I call the roll, I would like to note for the record that all 5 supervisors are participating via teleconference. As such, any votes will be handled by a roll call vote. Additionally, before we begin, any members of the public that wish to provide oral testimony during today's hearing, please review the instructions posted on the Clerk of the Board's webpage. With that, I'll now call the roll. Supervisor Jacob?
Here.
Supervisor Gaspar?
Present.
Supervisor Fletcher?
Here.
Vice Chairman Desmond?
Here.
Chairman Cox?
Here.
Thank you.
Just to kind of set some parameters, we're going to hear a staff presentation, which will be started off by Helen Roberts-Meyer, our Chief Administrative Officer. At the end of the staff presentation, we will be cutting off public comments as far as call-ins until Wednesday at 5:30 on August 12th. So if you wish to comment on the budget this morning, you should call in by the time the staff presentation is completed. And we will limit speakers this morning to 3 minutes per speaker. So with that, let me call on our Chief Administrative Officer to go ahead and introduce the budget for 2021.
Mr. Chairman, before we begin with the Chief Administrative Officer's presentation, I would like to note that we have one non-agenda public comment that we received. This comment is from Michelle Krug. It reads, "The Board of Supervisors announced a fund being available to seniors during the heat wave, particularly because the cool zones were not available. When I called AIS, I was told it was income-based. You have many seniors that are unable to leave their home during the pandemic. Income should not be the limiting factor affecting the safety of seniors like myself. Also, it is very difficult to make non-agenda public comment if you are blind and do not have access to the internet. Please reconsider." Mr. Chairman, as we move on to the budget hearing, Chairman Cox and members of the board, on July 20th, 2020, the Chief Administrative Officer's recommended operational plan for fiscal years 2020 through 2022 was released. Today marks the beginning of the budget hearings for the board to receive oral testimony on all areas of the budget. I would ask all members of the public that have submitted a request to speak, please wait to dial into the meeting until the conclusion of the staff presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clerk. Thank you, Chairman Cox, members of the board. Good morning. Today, we discuss the proposed spending of $6.4 billion of taxpayer money as outlined in the fiscal year 2020-2021 operational plan, also known as the budget. Despite a slight increase in year-over-year spending, this is not a typical budget. Heading into a new fiscal year, the county faces unprecedented challenges. Let's set the stage with a short video on the environment we are living in. If you could, go ahead.
Tonight, we have brand new information about San Diego's first confirmed case of coronavirus.
We're looking at a very tough day in the markets, and frankly, I think there's a real question now over how much the coronavirus spills into the real economy.
Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it.
I'm a public health nurse.
shiver, like you feel like a chills.
I'm Leon Williams, and I appreciate very much what the board is doing now.
When all this started, we were building a budget that planned to expand many services, but the dramatic developments of recent months abruptly changed that, and now we face new realities. I'll share highlights related to these events: the COVID-19 pandemic, social justice and racial equity, the economy, and our strategy to address them. First, COVID-19. Battling it is the county's top budget priority. The Health and Human Services Agency will see a budgetary increase tied to our COVID-19 efforts and CARES Act spending. That includes our test, trace, and treat strategy, increasing behavioral health telehealth capacity, expanding child welfare services, distributing medical supplies, food distribution, and shelter to vulnerable populations, planning for a safe election, and much, much more. The second challenge is social justice and racial equity. Nationwide conversations are driving change in our society's approach to public safety. These demands require an examination of county policies and how we engage our residents. This begins in the public safety group with reform initiatives and de-escalation training to help strengthen community trust. We are adding resources to citizen oversight of law enforcement. These efforts will continue across the organization with the newly created Office of Equity and Racial Justice, which will examine bias within the county enterprise, across the enterprise, and also in the region. The last overriding challenge I will highlight is our economic situation. Shutdowns aimed at fighting the coronavirus have shaken the economy. Revenue projections plummeted as service needs escalated. However, the law requires us to balance the budget. The county's long-practiced fiscal prudence is helping us maneuver through these unprecedented times. But that planning has its limits, and we can't continue all services at current levels indefinitely. The recommended budget proposes dipping into reserves, over $200 million in those reserves over the next 2 years, giving us time to make long-term adjustments. There are not many new programs or capital investments, and it eliminates some vacant staff positions and will make operational adjustments to meet the demands of new regulatory requirements. But rest assured, the county is not cutting core services, and we will boost our commitment to assisting vulnerable populations. The budget will build out the regional continuum of care, focusing on diversionary services such as crisis stabilization units and mobile crisis response teams to provide early intervention and treatment and avoid inundating our public safety partners. We are able to do this at a time when many local governments are struggling to stay afloat. This spending plan transformed the county to address current challenges and better position itself for the future. I will now turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Ebony Shelton, and our general managers to provide additional highlights of the budget. Ebony?
Thank you, Helen. Chairman Cox, members of the board, let's begin. Fiscal year 1920 brought significant revenue challenges compounded by fixed cost growth that would have otherwise been supported through these dollars, resulting in a gap between resources available and amounts needed to structurally balance the budget. In light of economic conditions and with an eye towards the future, the approach used to build this budget was deliberate and assumes no new programs or expansion of existing programs and no additional staffing, with exceptions for items that were previously approved by the board or necessary for emergency response. To close the budget gap, departments use a combination of strategies, including use of unassigned balances in the general fund, using resources outside of the general fund, and reevaluating needs for various programs that were slated for growth, including the capital program. And recommendations for service reductions have been made in every group with the exception of the Health and Human Services Agency. The next slide looks closer at the gap closing strategies in the budget by business group. Here on the left, we see the gap by group totaling $274 million in fiscal year 2021, with the majority, or $231 million of that gap, being driven by revenue shortfalls. The remaining columns from left to right represent corresponding budget strategies. Starting with one-time resources, this $109 million includes Proposition 172, Public Safety Sales Tax, and in the Health and Human Services Agency, or HHSA, intergovernmental transfers, securitized tobacco revenues, and state general fund resources, and resources committed for environmental health and planning and development services. Next is $28 million of recommended service reductions, largely in public safety, or PSG, as the sheriff manages vacancies, a reduction of 70 vacant positions in probation with no impacts to the safety of the public. The Land Use and Environment Group and the Finance and General Government Group, or FGG, will manage staffing and reduce support services. Deferrals and suspensions represent $66 million in cost avoidance, largely in the Health and Human Services Agency, including previously planned growth in staffing and in behavioral health services as business process reengineering opportunities are considered. Public Safety Group and the Land Use and Environment Group will also slow vehicle replacements and facilities projects where it's appropriate to do so. And where these mitigation strategies were exhausted, the final mitigation strategy is a recommendation to use $71 million of unassigned general fund balances. This amount is concentrated in public safety to maintain core services, but also in the Health and Human Services Agency for essential health and social service programs, and in the Land Use and Environmental Group for environmental health and permit services, among others. With the budget strategy and gap solutions covered, I'll now turn to how this culminated into the county's overall budget, starting with total appropriations. The recommended budget totals $6.4 billion in fiscal year 2021, an increase of $159 million, or 2.5%. And in alignment with the budget strategy, the increase is being driven by two factors: salary and benefit costs, which includes negotiated increases in retirement costs, and the response to COVID-19 public health emergency. Looking at the operational plan by group agency, appropriations for the Public Safety Group, the Land Use and Environment Group, Capital Program, and Finance Other are decreasing from the previous year, while the Health and Human Services Agency and the Finance and General Government Group are increasing. Pandemic response and safety net programs are driving the increase in the Health and Human Services Agency, and the increase in the Finance and General Government Group is due to one-time upgrades of key information technology systems. The general managers will discuss budget drivers in more detail later in this presentation. So next, let's take a look at total staffing. Countywide, staffing levels are recommended to decrease by 95 staff years, with the majority of the decrease, or 100 vacant positions, in public safety. An increase of 9 staff years in the Land Use and Environment Group is recommended, along with a net decrease of 4 vacant staff years in the Finance and General Government Group. Next, I'll turn to funding sources. Focusing on the right side of this chart, nearly half of the county's total revenue comes from state, federal, and other intergovernmental sources. These revenue categories are experiencing the most significant changes. Consistent with previous projections, state revenues are anticipated to decrease overall from declining statewide sales tax receipts, notably for the Proposition 172 fund, which supports regional law enforcement services, and in health and public safety realignment revenues, along with state gas tax receipts, which support public roads. In contrast, federal revenues will see a net increase, largely from coronavirus-related stimulus funds. The budget also includes the use of $370.7 million of one-time fund balances, including $150 million of unassigned fund balance that's been used to balance the budget. The result of this will be reflected in our financial statements later this year. To provide an illustration of anticipated impacts, this table will provide an estimate of general fund unassigned fund balance. At the end of fiscal year 18-19, the county had just over $712 million available in reserves. Taking into account results and amounts planned for the budget, we anticipate the year-end balance to be about $611 million. While that's a significant resource, the administrative code requires the county to maintain a minimum general fund reserve equal to 2 months of expenses for unanticipated needs, which is now estimated to be $707 million, leaving a gap of more than $95 million. In fiscal year 21-22, $135 million of general fund reserves are planned to balance the budget, effectively adding to the amount of the projected gap under a worst-case scenario. Simply put, the county will fall short of its minimum reserve requirement, and this must be restored. The budget includes a 3-year replenishment strategy supported by projected growth in general purpose revenue. Important to note is that the plan constrains this revenue source, meaning that it wouldn't be available for spending on any other activities. As general managers will detail next, the budget has a solid plan to manage through an uncertain economy and environment and to ensure ongoing fiscal stability into the future. I'll now turn to Holly Porter, Deputy Chief Administrative Officer and General Manager of the Public Safety Group.
Good morning, Chairman Cox and members of the board. The Public Safety Group includes 10 departments with a total group recommended budget of just over $2 billion. This represents a decline of $13.5 million or 0.7% less than the group's budget last fiscal year, as our criminal justice departments have all been negatively impacted by reduced sales tax revenue, vehicle license fees, and fewer general purpose revenue dollars than anticipated before the COVID-19 pandemic. Public Safety Group departments are using available trust fund and other fund balances on a one-time basis to help cover the major losses in program revenue. Along with these resources, some program and service reductions and the elimination of vacant positions within the group are proposed. The Public Safety Groups include 7,456 staff positions. Public Safety Group staffing in the proposed budget will decrease by 100 positions or 1.3% less than the previous fiscal year. The staffing reduction will be in vacant positions eliminated in probation and the Sheriff's Department. Both departments have been significantly impacted by declines in Prop 172 and realignment funding. Despite these significant challenges and budget gaps, there are no recommendations for staff layoffs or demotions. In order to maintain essential public safety services, the Sheriff's Department is utilizing one-time resources, expenditure reductions, deferral or suspension of projects, and unassigned general fund monies to mitigate the shortfalls. Changes in service delivery include decreases in detention-related services, administrative and facility costs, and changes in services provided by the Sheriff's Department to the Superior Court for court security. The Sheriff's Department recommended budget includes a net loss of 30 vacant positions, which includes a decrease of 32 staff positions from a food services program with probation that has ended, 4 staff positions after a reduction in reentry services and detentions, 3 positions reduced at the request of contracting agencies, which includes 2 from the City of Lemon Grove and 1 from Del Mar Fairgrounds, and 2 positions after streamlining medication processes in sheriff's jails. The recommended budget also includes some added positions, 2 positions in the Sheriff's Court Services Bureau for assistance requested by the Health and Human Services Agency at the San Diego Psychiatric Hospital, and 9 positions for the Homeless Assistance Resource Team to provide in-person support for the homeless populations in the unincorporated area as requested by your board this year. Funding for the San Diego County Sheriff's Department enables law enforcement to respond to distress calls and maintain community safety. An annual report prepared by the San Diego Association of Governments calculates the law enforcement officer to resident ratio for agencies across San Diego County. As you can see from this slide, the Sheriff's Department employs 1.13 sworn officers per 1,000 residents in the areas where the Sheriff's Department provides services. This is one of the lower staffing ratios in the region, and it is well below the national average of 2.8 officers per 1,000 residents. In early 2019, and far in advance of the recent focus on police reform in our country, the Sheriff's Department reached out to the Center for Policing Equity, a research center based at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. The nonprofit looks at data surrounding police interactions with the community with the goal of reducing disparities. The Center for Policing Equity is currently analyzing information collected under the Racial and Identity Profiling Act and will also survey Sheriff's Department personnel and provide feedback about the department's culture. In the coming fiscal year, the Sheriff's Department will use feedback from this analysis to examine departmental policies, procedures, and training. In June of 2020, the Sheriff's Department issued a directive requiring deputies to intervene and stop excessive force by other officers and to report those incidents immediately to a supervisor. The directive is part of deputy training, but will now be permanently reflected in the department's updated policies and procedures manual. In the coming fiscal year, the Sheriff's Department will also implement trainings that address cultural diversity and accountability. As the first law enforcement agency in the region to provide de-escalation training, many deputies beginning in 2019 have already been trained in the latest de-escalation techniques. Those trainings will continue this fiscal year, reaching all sworn personnel, and the training will be included in the department's policies and procedures. The Sheriff's Department understands the value of public outreach and relationship building. Deputies take time to engage with the communities they serve and host events ranging from school activities to safety preparedness trainings. In 2019, the Sheriff's Department took part in nearly 1,800 community engagement events across the region. The District Attorney continues to identify innovative and effective ways to better support victims of crime. In the coming year, the District Attorney will address the need to establish a Family Justice Center in North County. There's a call for victims and witnesses of domestic violence, human trafficking, child molestation, and sexual assault to have greater access to community-based services under one roof. Co-located services that address trauma in a comprehensive and integrated manner, support social justice for victims and their families, and empower them to transition from victim to survivor. The District Attorney's Office recently implemented a variety of criminal justice reform strategies to include adult misdemeanor diversion and mental health diversion. Redirecting youth away from the criminal justice system is a top priority for the District Attorney and for all of the criminal justice partners within the public safety group. Last year, the District Attorney announced a juvenile diversion initiative to provide San Diego County youth an opportunity to address underlying causes of delinquent behavior. At-risk youth will be able to engage in a variety of community-based intervention services, including case management, substance use, and behavioral health services, in addition to restorative justice. The initiative is scheduled to launch this fiscal year and will further reduce the number of youth in juvenile hall. Workplace justice is another area of focus for the District Attorney's Office in the coming year. The District Attorney will launch a workplace justice team focused on prosecuting unfair business practice, wage and hour violations, payroll tax evasion, wage theft, labor trafficking, and labor trafficking cases. The public defender recognizes a criminal record creates barriers to employment, housing, and civic engagement. Through a nationally recognized award-winning program called Fresh Start, the Office of the Public Defender offers comprehensive criminal record relief to help people move past their mistakes. The Public Defender has a goal this fiscal year to assist 2,000 clients and achieve 90% conviction relief on petitions received. In addition to these areas of focus in the budget, the Office of the Public Defender has been significantly impacted in workload by two changes in state law. Penal Code 1437 makes it possible for a felony murder inmate to apply for resentencing if that inmate was not the actual killer. And according to Penal Code 3051, another recent change in state law, any youth offender who is 25 years of age or younger at the time of their crimes is entitled to a youth offender parole hearing. The purpose of the hearing is to provide for a meaningful opportunity for that person to obtain release. Providing the appropriate representation to clients, as dictated by the changes in state law, will be both a priority and a challenge for the public defender in the coming fiscal year. This additional work is on top of the significant resources required to defend 5 pending death penalty cases. These increases in workload for the public defender will require additional staffing resources, which will be addressed in the CAO change letter later this month. Probation faced a large funding gap this fiscal year, primarily due to declines in Prop 172 and realignment revenues. However, even before pandemic-related losses in revenue, probation faced budget challenges because of reductions in federal revenue for youth services, declines in fee revenue, and changes at the state level that shifted more juvenile detention responsibilities from the state to the county. However, the probation department has remained agile and flexible. In recent months, the state has been releasing thousands of inmates early from state prison to be supervised locally by county probation officers. Probation officers are diligently working to supervise and support this temporary but unpredictable influx of newly released state inmates. Due to sharp declines in program revenue, probation proposes to eliminate 70 vacant positions as they continue to align the organization with national best practices. The 70 targeted positions are from programs outside the department's core mission, changes to a program, or in a few cases, the work will be distributed to other units within the department. The budgetary challenges are significant. However, we are proposing no layoffs or demotions. In 2019, the Board of Supervisors approved the probation department contracting with the Council of Juvenile Justice Administrators. The council co-created the youth in custody practice model with Georgetown University's Center for Juvenile Justice Reform. The council made 55 recommendations to align San Diego County's juvenile detention operations with national best practices for conflict de-escalation and staff youth engagement. Based on these recommendations and those provided by Georgetown, probation is now putting the finishing touches on a 3-year strategic plan for youth services. Last year, the probation department began the process of separating into 2 distinct operations, adult and juvenile services. The needs of youth and adults are very different, and training for probation officers must reflect those differences. In the coming year, probation will fully separate all adult and youth training programs. Youth services will include specialized training on adolescent brain development, trauma-informed care, implicit bias, and restorative practices. Probation will also add youth advisory councils and a volunteer coordinator to further improve the programs and services provided in our juvenile detention facilities. Fire safety and maintaining superior firefighting and emergency management capabilities continues to be a top priority for the Public Safety Group. This year, the Fire Authority will continue work on their strategic plan goals with an emphasis on community risk reduction at the neighborhood level. The formation of the San Diego County Fire Protection District and the transition from CSA 135 to a fire district will be complete by the beginning of next calendar year. 4 capital improvement fire station projects will be moving forward this year, including Palomar Mountain and Mount Laguna. Sunshine Summit Fire Station will get a new fire engine bay, and planning will begin for a new fire station in East Otay Mesa. The county's Office of Emergency Services will launch an earthquake early warning pilot program this fall, which will allow residents to take cover in advance of heavy shaking. We know that safety is a basic tenet of overall wellness and quality of life. Despite significant fiscal challenges, the Public Safety Group departments are committed to maintaining the status of San Diego County as one of the nation's safest urban regions while reducing recidivism and offering diversion programs that direct people away from the criminal justice system. At this time, I'll turn the presentation over to Acting HHSA Director, Dean Arabatsis.
Thank you, Holly. Good morning, Chairman Cox and members of the board. In putting together a recommended operational plan, we know that when the economy turns downward, demand for our services goes up. Today, I'm presenting a balanced budget that takes into consideration the current pandemic, the resulting increased demand for our services, and the financial hurdles presented by COVID-19. We have accomplished this balanced budget through the strategic use of one-time funding and increased allocations from the state and federal governments. Additionally, we are re-engineering our business processes, including leveraging telework to reduce facility costs and pausing some new investments we had planned before the corona pandemic. Our proposed budget allows us to manage the anticipated needs for this year and places us in a good position to adapt and adjust as needed throughout the year and into the uncertain future as we learn more about what kind of revenue we can expect. The Health and Human Services Agency has a total recommended budget of nearly $2.5 billion, supporting 6 departments, the county successor agency, and administration. This is an increase of $205 million, which is about 9% higher than last year. More than half of this increase is related to CARES Act funding for pandemic response efforts. We are also funding caseload increases for CalWorks and General Relief, and are incorporating several initiatives to strengthen county priorities recently approved by your board. For example, $25 million to increase the behavioral health treatment capacity and almost $24 million to address homelessness in the unincorporated areas. The budget also includes $54 million for scheduled salary and benefit increases. Actions to offset these increases include reductions such as limiting management reserves at the agency level and removing prior one-time costs. There are no service or staffing reduction proposed in the budget this year because we are able to draw some additional state and federal funding as well as the strategic use of one-time resources to close the gap. Our budget positions remain unchanged at 6,771. To ensure we can continue to provide critical services in a timely manner, the agency will monitor departmental metrics and may shift staff among departments as necessary to meet the greatest needs. In addition, we are committed to augmenting capacity for core public health programs by shifting 80 positions from other areas within the agency. A top priority for the upcoming year is continuing to respond to the pandemic. Over the past few months, your board has allocated over $387 million of CARES Act funding for programs and services which began last fiscal year and will continue. We are investing in the areas of testing, tracing, and treatment, or T3, telehealth, economic stimulus for small businesses and restaurants, childcare, food services, and pandemic response funding for cities. Setting up T3 continues to be a massive undertaking, including hiring hundreds of staff and setting up a variety of testing sites such as drive-up, walk-in, and no appointment, and having the flexibility to deploy testing sites into areas disproportionately affected by COVID-19. In response to the many communities within our region, we have been deepening the cultural diversity and competency of our TRACE team so that we can serve residents effectively. While responding to the pandemic, the agency also remains committed to delivering hundreds of core services and programs to meet myriad needs of our community. My presentation today will highlight investments made in the following critical service areas: strengthening individuals and families, addressing homeless and affordable housing, and providing behavioral health and public health care. Our budget includes an additional $28 million to serve those who are facing tough economic times, with much going to meet the increased demand for safety net programs like CalWorks and General Relief. We are also making investments to improve equity for our child welfare services, or CWS, families. For example, we want to address the disproportionate representation of African Americans in our system and assist parents to reunify with their children. We are doing this through a cultural competency training program that has already begun in CWS and will be deployed across the agency. We are also making efforts to increase and enhance recruitment and retention of foster families who represent the demographics of our children in our care. For seniors, we will continue implementation of the aging roadmap and initiatives like Alzheimer's awareness and support to improve quality of life for them and their caregivers. In any given month, HHSA programs serve more than 1 million San Diegans with benefits like food, job support, and cash aid. Since the pandemic, there has been greater need for services or increased need for higher benefit amounts. We serve nearly 5,000 children and their families in CWS, from foster care to adoptions to guardianship. and 28,000 seniors in our in-home supportive services program with over 3 million hours of services per month. With COVID-19, the demand for home-delivered meals for seniors and disabled individuals more than tripled. We went from 28,000 to 85,000 per week in very short order, with more than 360,000 meals delivered in June alone. Thanks to our contracted community service providers, we were able to ramp up quickly so that people could remain safely at their homes. We are increasing our budget by almost $33 million for efforts addressing homelessness and affordable housing. The largest of these investments, with an increase of almost $24 million, was approved by your board in May and includes funding for the Hotel Motel Voucher Program and local rental subsidy for the unincorporated area. Additional funding approved by your board includes the Housing Our Youth Program, or HOY, to help former youth and young parents who are experiencing homelessness. To successfully transition veterans who are exiting jail, we are connecting them to services like housing and job training while they are still in custody through our Community Care Coordination for Veterans Program, or C3. The county's Innovative Housing Trust Fund, the No Place Like Home funding, and other state and federal dollars address housing difficulties in our region. The budget continues existing investments to nearly double the number of affordable housing over 5 years, from roughly 2,600 presently to over 5,000 units by 2025. These investments help veterans, low-income, seriously mentally ill, and others with special needs, as well as homeless individuals and families, secure housing. To expand housing options across the region, we will continue to recruit new landlords to rent to low-income individuals and families, with a target of adding at least 150 to the existing almost 3,600 actively leasing landlords. Over the past 5 years, we've invested more than $300 million in behavioral health services, growing the budget from $442 million in fiscal year 2015-16 to a recommended $762 million in the present fiscal year 2020-2021, an increase of almost $50 million this year. A large part of the funds added for the year support commitments made by the board, including the Behavioral Health Impact Fund, with $25 million going toward capital projects by our community providers and $15 million for telehealth infrastructure, which has already changed lives by making services available during stay-at-home orders. Approximately $10 million is to strengthen our crisis response capacity, including first responder services and patient stabilization, and diversion services to help people get treatment instead of going to hospitals or requiring incarceration. Our focus is on transforming the overall behavioral health system of care from one driven by crisis to one of continuous care and prevention. Behavioral health services plays an essential role in the wellness of the individuals and families of our communities. Mental health and drug treatment programs typically serve more than 100,000 individuals, and in fact, we may see more this year, given the stress of the current health and economic crises. We provide stigma reduction public awareness campaigns, and we've also trained more than 35,000 community members in suicide awareness to reach diverse populations. This pandemic has elevated anxiety and stress, making a strong behavioral health system more important than ever. Public health services will remain at the forefront of the county's focus this year by continuing to lead the COVID-19 response in coordination with the entire community, including the county enterprise, hospitals, healthcare providers, and the cities and representatives across every sector. Meanwhile, the core public health services must continue. While it may feel like the pandemic has stopped a lot of normal activity in our lives, public health does not shut down. Clearly, it is critical for our region that we prioritize our public health infrastructure. This is important not only for the pandemic response and other emergent issues that may arise, but it is also necessary to support public health services aimed at preventing disease, promoting wellness, and providing access to quality care. We will make new investments in public health services by leveraging grant opportunities for efforts like addressing the regional opioid epidemic and increased funding for upgrades and supports of various systems such as the San Diego Immunization Registry to collaborate with county and community partners. We continue to protect the county's health through surveillance of diseases like hepatitis, measles, and HIV, to name a few. We will provide case management services to almost 14,000 children with chronic illness or disease or disabilities through the California Children's Services Program. Other core public health services include testing and treatment for sexually transmitted diseases, lab work, managing vital records like birth certificates, and providing immunizations and refugee health services. As this pandemic has made very clear, a public health emergency affects far more than physical health. We will work with the resources at hand to provide these services to our community needs and brace ourselves for the hardships we have yet to face. Thank you. And I will now turn over to Sarah Gossi to present on the Land Use and Environment Group.
Thank you, Dean. The Land Use and Environment Group's recommended operational plan will put the public's money to work to protect health and safety, preserve the environment, and improve quality of life. LUGE provides direct community services such as road repairs for the unincorporated community, the second largest jurisdiction by population in the region, and region-wide services to 3.3 million residents and 35 million visitors across our 19 jurisdictions. LUGE's proposed budget is $632.2 million. The budget will decrease by $19.8 million, or 3%, as a result of reduced state gas tax revenues and fees for services, which is partially offset by salary and benefit increases due to negotiated labor agreements and additional staffing. The proposed budget includes 1,955 staff years. We are proposing to add 9 new positions. 5 of these positions would be added to the Air Pollution Control District, 1 for the new Sweetwater Place Park, 1 to operate the newly acquired Live Oak Springs water system, and 2 positions to support board-directed ongoing sustainability efforts. LUGE has worked to support and protect the community during the COVID-19 pandemic. While these have been challenging times, we embrace the opportunity to find new ways to serve residents and businesses. To help local businesses weather the economic hardship, LUGE departments implemented board direction to defer fees and lease payments for customers and are proactively providing educational materials to guide businesses. Departments are providing new online options for services, including community participation through virtual hearings and workshops, video inspections, and online permit applications. Since March, the demand for county digital library services have increased 67% over the same period last year. Online recreation offerings such as ranger-led virtual hikes and classrooms are also being enjoyed by many. This greater use of technology is serving our stakeholders with improved efficiency and safety, and is anticipated to continue after the health emergency as part of our normal business operations. With a focus on vulnerable populations, LUGE will continue to collaborate with the Health and Human Services Agency to identify and respond to emerging public health risks, and will engage with the community to provide education, resources, and opportunities to actively protect their health and well-being. Our budget recommends $56.6 million to support healthy living services. This funding would help us improve air quality and test beach water so we can inform the public when it is not safe to swim. It would ensure the safety of food facilities and built structures through inspections. Part of this funding would also reduce the risk of vector and mosquito-borne illnesses and protect people from hazardous spills in the community while supporting services that increase access to locally produced fresh food. Our budget also recommends $242 million to improve the region's public infrastructure. This starts with building better roads. In light of the economic downturn, this year's goal is to maintain the rating of our roads, or pavement condition index, at the current rating of PCI 63 through the end of fiscal year 2021 with a budget of $40 million. The public infrastructure dollars would also help maintain flood control channels, sewer systems, water districts, and our 8 airports. Unincorporated area residents would receive 2,500 feet of new sidewalks, 60 ADA ramps, and 43 miles of bike lanes. This budget would also include $2.4 million dedicated to the county's unsheltered residents for sanitation in parks and along public infrastructure, as well as for education and social services support. Protecting the natural environment is central to LUGE's mission. Within this budget, LUGE is recommending $37.3 million to promote environmental sustainability. Services provided with this funding would help the county achieve its climate action mandates through specific measures that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 132,000 metric tons. $1.5 million would build solar panel carports at Sweetwater Lane Park, providing shade and making it a zero net energy park. This budget would help the county acquire 500 more acres of habitat, continuing to build on the tremendous success of the multiple species conservation program. We would also continue to protect our $1.8 billion agricultural community from invasive pests. In addition, 443 acres of agricultural land would be preserved under the Purchase of Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, and 3,500 trees would be planted throughout the unincorporated region. Another $28.9 million is recommended for clean beaches, streams, rivers, and to continue the county's commitment to clean water through stormwater compliance efforts. It would also build projects to improve water quality, such as trash capture devices, runoff treatment systems, and improvements to sewer lines. To improve air quality in our communities, $12.7 million in funding would be awarded from several state grants for programs that encourage the use of clean technologies. Whether it is teaching people to read, providing teenagers with positive ways to spend their free time, or making sure you get what you pay for, Luge services help improve the quality of life for San Diegans and visitors. This budget recommends $36 million to strengthen the lives of San Diegans. It would help provide activities in a safe place for 8,000 teens during critical hours through the Safe Destination Nights program, and continue adult literacy classes in Library High School, through which we confer accredited diplomas on adults. We would inspect 30,000 weighing and measuring devices and verify organic agriculture products to bolster consumer confidence. $21.1 million would also implement new projects to reduce air pollutants in the environmental justice communities of Barrio Logan, Logan Heights, Sherman Heights, and Western National City. $172 million is recommended for capital projects for parks and libraries. Housing affordability is important for our region's quality of life. $5.1 million is recommended in this budget to increase the number of affordable housing units available. We would waive fees and provide pre-approved plans for accessory dwelling units, and also provide rental housing and lodging inspections to ensure more healthy options are available in the unincorporated areas and the cities we serve. I will now turn the presentation to Ebony.
Thank you, Sarah. The final group that we'd like to present to you today is the Finance and General Government Group, also referred to as FGG. The group provides essential internal support services to county departments, as well as key governmental services to internal support departments, such as voter and election services, property assessments and tax collections, passport application processing, marriage services, and accepting and recording of legal documents. The total budget for the group is recommended to be supported by $774.9 million of spending authority, which is an increase of $45.8 million from the 1920 adopted budget. The primary drivers influencing growth are salary and benefit costs, the planned upgrade of key financial and human resource systems, the upcoming presidential election, and resources to support the new Office of Equity and Racial Justice. The budget for the group reflects service reductions across support departments in the form of vacant positions. With that, let's move to recommended staffing levels. The total staffing levels recommended for the group are 1,746 staff years. This represents a net decrease of 4 staff years, driven by the recommended reductions in general purpose revenue to support departments, partially offset by increased staff to support district operational needs. This staffing level represents the needs of the group to meet operational objectives for the coming year, which we will review next. During this unprecedented crisis, the departments provided vital administrative support for the Emergency Operations Center, including media, technology, legal, and financial services. Critical to the safe reopening plan for all county departments, purchasing and contracting and general services secured and installed safety measures and will continue providing this support going forward. Departments quickly mobilized to provide services online instead of inline by using technology as an enabler. This nimbleness will ensure continuity of key government services such as property assessments and tax collection, while also providing a framework to ensure continued civil engagement while adhering to social distancing requirements. And where it makes sense, services have been moved outdoors, such as marriage licenses and ceremonies. In recognition of the historical social movements underway, additional investments have been recommended in alignment with your board's priorities to focus on equity and social justice. The Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board was transferred to the Finance and General Government Group, and preliminary recommendations are to include $450,000 and 3 new FTEs through the budget change letter process in order for the CLRB to exercise its expanded oversight and authority. In addition, the budget recommends $5 million for the newly created Office of Equity and Racial Justice. While this unprecedented environment is driving many changes in our operations, the group will remain focused on mission-critical initiatives in the coming year. In response to the pandemic, under the governor's executive and legislative actions, the county is launching a robust Vote Safer San Diego campaign, which balances health and safety with accessibility, security, and transparency for the upcoming presidential election. All voters will receive mail ballots, and there will be an increase in the number of mail ballot drop-off locations. The changes provide for consolidated polling locations with larger facilities, expanded technologies, and layouts to account for social distancing, with locations open for a 4-day period. General Services will manage execution of the county's capital program, including year 2 of a 4-year phase project at the County Administration Center, and start to implement the county's electric vehicle roadmap. And finally, our human resource and finance teams will focus on one-time upgrades of key financial accounting and human resource information technology systems to ensure modern infrastructure is maintained. In closing, let's discuss the road ahead for the county. This operational plan has been crafted in an environment of incredible uncertainty, and as such, this plan is not without risk. We're relying on the use of reserves to balance the budget, and this is a one-time funding source that's, once it's spent, it's gone, and it must be replenished to mitigate against future risks. In addition, we continue to monitor and engage with our partners at the federal and state levels with the understanding that they're not immune from the economic impacts, and ultimately, those impacts may trickle down to us. With these risks in mind and uncertainty regarding the economic recovery, we've mitigated this exposure in the budget based on what we know now. We remain focused on navigating the region through the pandemic and prioritizing equity and social justice while maintaining a balanced budget. And with that, I'd like to turn this back over to Helen for final remarks.
Thank you, Ebony, and a big thank you to the group finance directors and communications teams for the video and the presentation. Well done. While we face many unknowns that have the potential to impact county operations, we should all be reassured by our most valuable county asset, our employees. They work tirelessly to protect the public's health, safety, quality of life, and infrastructure. Many have turned their homes into offices and are also serving as teachers for their children. The demands on them are great, but they steadfastly remain committed to serving the public and fulfilling our vision of a county that is healthy, safe, and thriving. I'd like to thank the people who helped prepare the recommended budget before you today. Thank you to the sheriff, the district attorney, assessor, recorder, county clerk, and treasurer tax collector, who I can always count on to work collaboratively. Thanks to all the general managers and executive leadership team whose direction is irreplaceable. And a special thank you this year to our department heads and our fiscal staff. They had a particularly challenging responsibility to identify and maintain services with diminishing revenue sources. You worked extraordinarily hard, and I really appreciate you. Thank you very much. And finally, thank you to Tracy, Ebony, and the staff in the Office of Financial Planning. Without your bright minds and innovative teams, these numbers and strategies would never come together. Chairman Cox, before I turn it back over to you, I'd like to make one more announcement, and that is to make sure the public is aware that this presentation in its entirety will be available on the county's budget portal. We will not be repeating this presentation at the Wednesday night hearing, so any members of the public who would like to view it in advance, we welcome that. We would actually appreciate you doing that so you have a better in-depth understanding of where our priorities are in the $6.7 billion budget. Mr. Chairman, with that, that concludes our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam CAO. That was a very good report and certainly relatively concise given the size of the budget. Appreciate all the time that staff has put together in putting this budget together so that we can begin the deliberative process. We do have no group presentations, and I understand we have 24 individual speakers, but before I get to those speakers, let me ask if any of my colleagues have any questions to staff before we get to the public speakers. Supervisor or Vice Chairman Desmond?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that, and Helen and all the staff members appreciate all of the the great presentation and all the hard work and effort that this took, especially with the COVID situation upon us as well. So I do have just a handful of questions here. I guess the first one is on the reserves, my favorite topic. I don't know if this is Ebony or Tracy, but I think the reserves are, you said it, but it's well worth emphasizing that essentially we have 707 million set is what's required, and this year we're showing a $95 million decrease in that 707 million. I understand that, but then in the 21-22 it's another 135 million that we're using out of reserves. My question is, does that put us at the end of 2022, I guess at a negative 240 million, or where does that 135 million play in?
Supervisor Desmond, I can answer that question for you. When we're looking at our position at the end of this fiscal year, you're exactly right in that we're estimating that our required balance would be $707 million, but that will likely only end with $611 million. So that's the $95 million shortfall that we will experience in fiscal year 1920. On top of that, we would then add the amount that we are using to balance the fiscal year 21-22 budget at this time. So we would add the 95 million to the 135 million.
So at the end of 2022, we're going to have about a 240 million, estimating at this point in time, about a 240 million shortfall of what the reserves that we projected that we need for the 60-day reserves. Is that correct?
Yeah, about $230 million. That's right.
About $230 million. Okay. Okay.
And so we'll replenish that over a 3-year period.
And that plan for replenishing that is what, or do we have that plan laid out now, or what is the plan for replenishing that?
Yes, we do have the plan for replenishing that. It's required by administrative code that we replenish that balance over a 3-year period. The plan for replenishing it is to be supported by our general purpose revenue growth. We believe we'll have enough growth there to support that. The amounts specifically are for the public included in the operational plan document in our reserves and resources section if you'd like to review that. But it's effectively $25 million in year 1, another $170 million in year 2, and then the remaining balance in year 3.
Okay, and year 1 starts next fiscal year?
By the end of fiscal year 2021, we hope to replenish $25 million of that.
Okay. All right, thank you. And then just another quick question for you, Ebony, while you're here. The 5 satellite locations for the November 2020 presidential election, now that we're going to an all mail-in ballot, what's going to be the function of these satellite locations? Is that for people to vote at or people to drop off their mail-in ballots? Maybe that's for Vu, but
no, I can answer that question. It's going to be for actual drop-off locations, so there will be double the amount of drop-off locations.
So it's going to be drop-off locations, not necessarily voting locations, as I understood them to be before.
That's my understanding.
Let me ask if Michael Vu is online. I believe he was going to try to join us online. All the department heads were, and I think he would be able to give you more specifics on exactly what's entitled.
Well, and I don't want to get too far off the
Sorry.
budget here. I
No,
can get
that's
this.
okay. If he is online, I want to give him an opportunity, and if not, we will have him available Wednesday night to also give you that opportunity. But I know that there is a requirement in the executive order on how elections have to be conducted, and so he is on the statewide registrars association that has been working on those plans. Michael, are you online? He is not yet. We will get him so that by the end of the public testimony, he can address that question, Supervisor. Thank you.
Okay. I have a few more questions for Holly. With the probation department I think you mentioned the fact that we've got the decrease of 70 full-time equivalent employees is outside of the core of the programs, and there's no layoffs or demotions. But I'm just curious, I want to make sure that we're able to handle, I guess, the additional folks that are being let out of prisons statewide, that probation is going to be able to handle that, the influx of more people. Are they confident that, are you confident that we're going to be able to handle that influx of new prisoners that probation is going to have to be dealing with?
Supervisor Desmond, thank you for that question. This is the biggest challenge right now for the probation department as they're receiving this unexpected influx of early release state prisoners from CDCR. Between July 1st and August 4th, they received 280 early release inmates, and according to the governor, we should expect additional inmates through the end of this calendar year. The staffing in the unit that supervises those early release clients is unfortunately not where it should be. But with the reduction in the 70 vacant positions, we're looking at mitigation actions to try and transfer armed officers to that post-release community supervision unit. We've looked at case-carrying officers across the department and the ratios of clients to officer, and there are numerous units outside of that post-release community supervision unit that do have advantageous ratios where probation could perhaps transfer some individuals to meet this area of greatest need right now. Unfortunately, keeping, recruiting, training armed officers is a challenge. It takes about a year. So in terms of hiring new individuals, they do have 4 vacancies in that unit, and they'll start a recruitment right away, but it takes about a year to hire armed officers. So they are looking at several mitigation actions, how those newly arrived clients are assessed, and whether or not those low-level clients might be assessed on an administrative caseload as opposed to armed officer caseload. So in short, or to sum it up, they are looking at several mitigation actions, and one of those is with the reduction of the 70 vacant positions, are there individuals who would be appropriate to transfer to the unit that supervises those newly released state inmates?
Well, I just noticed, previously when we had a lot of prisoners that were released, and they became our homeless on the streets, and because they didn't have from the state didn't have programs or proper care or treatment, and I just want to make sure we're not overwhelmed in probation on that effort. So we'll be watching that apparently. And then I got a question for HHSA on for Dean on the administrative support. The administrative support increased 81 million from 250 million to 297 million. Can you kind of clarify how much administrative report, I guess more administrative support we need with that $81 million?
My understanding, Supervisor Desmond, much of that came from the COVID-19 CARES Act funding. I would like to have Andy Pease come up and explain that piece of it, please.
Good morning, Supervisors. Yes, you're right. In the Administrative Support Division, we did go up $81 million. $100 million of that was where we increased appropriations for our CARES Act pandemic response. We put it there rather than public health because our response is larger than just public health, and we'll wait and see where the needs are and then shift that accordingly. We also took administration down in some areas. That's why we went up $100 million, but then we went down overall. We reduced our use of management reserves and reduced some appropriations in our teleworking and our facilities area as we're trying to do business process reengineering to trying to find savings within the agency so that we can maintain services in our direct programs.
Well, that's essentially then where you parked CARES Act dollars and then you're using them throughout the agency, but I guess they were put in administrative support. Is that?
That's a correct statement.
Okay. All right. One last question, I guess, for Sarah Agassi. I heard under the PCI, I guess that's the pavement condition index, you're going to try to keep it at 63. I understand our overall goal is to get it up to 70. And are you saying we're only going to just be able to, and I realize COVID changed things, but you're saying we're going to be keeping it at 63 and that's where we're going to be at this year with this budget?
Vice Chairman Desmond, that's correct. In light of the COVID-19 economic impacts, our budget actually for the road repairs, we had pre-COVID-19 anticipated proposing to spend $56 million. And in light of the decrease in revenues, which is about $19.8 million, we are reducing the budget this year to $40 million. And with that, we are able to maintain the 63 PCI so that we're not causing additional impacts as far as the wear and tear on the roads. And what that will mean for us is we will need to watch closely what the economic recovery looks like to be able to come back to you and the board and share at what point we would anticipate being able to reach the PCI 70. At this point, we are not able to anticipate the time frame for that.
Okay, well, I appreciate that you're at least holding it at 63, but to me, this is one of those situations that the longer you let it go, the more it costs you in the long run. So preventative maintenance has always been a kind of a push of mine for the road. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate giving me the time to ask.
Vice Chairman Desmond, we've been able to get Michael Vu to call in. He was listening, so I think he is aware of your question. Mr. Vu, are you available?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. Supervisor Desmond, in response to your question, the 5 satellite locations and the costs associated with them will be folded into the 235 sites that we're ultimately going to solidify in part of the election, as part of the November election. So we will not be having the satellite locations, but those costs associated with those 5 satellite locations will be folded into the 235 sites that we're actively solidifying right now that will be open for 4 days.
Okay, but those are going to be, so we're not having the 5 satellites. You're now creating 235 different locations, and that's for drop-off only, or is that for voting?
That will be for in-person voting pursuant to the governor's executive order, Supervisor.
Oh, so there's both mail-in and in-person voting then at these other sites? Is that my understanding?
That's correct. As part of the governor's executive order, should we move towards the option of consolidating the polling places more heavily, that means every single registered voter will receive a mail ballot, and then we would still have to provide in-person voting at minimum 1 for every 10,000 registered voters throughout the entire county.
And that's the 235. Okay.
That's correct.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here.
Okay, are there any other questions to staff before we get into the public testimony?
Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Jacob and then Supervisor Gaspar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Supervisor Desmond raised some really, really important issues. Great questions, Jim. I wanted to go back to the reserves. When I hear the plan that we're going to be using one-time money in order to continue certain services. In other words, one-time money for ongoing operating expenses. That is what got this board in trouble almost 28 years ago, because the budget was not structurally balanced. We fixed that years ago. And so we were only spending one-time money on one-time expenses, mostly capital expenses, and then only ongoing revenue on the ongoing expenses. I do have a question at the end of this, but I think it's very important to point out this is a very risky road to go down. And there will be a day of reckoning. And it sounds like in the development of this budget, although it's a balanced budget, and that's a good thing, when you're diminishing the reserves and then have a plan a couple of years out to build those back, and if the economy does not provide the revenue necessary, there is going to be some serious cuts that are going to have to be made. So Greg and I will not be here, but I think Supervisor Desmond raising these issues for the future, because he will be here, and in dealing with a budget situation that may not be as easy as the ones we've had over the last maybe some odd 20 years, when we've had revenues, we've had revenue increases. Now, going back to the reserves and the importance of those, I think we all well know the importance is of having adequate reserves is to make sure that we maintain a credit rating. And the importance of the credit rating is because we have to borrow money each year and we get a lower rate of return, lower interest rate, because we have maintained over the year a high credit rating, the AAA credit rating. So my question then is, what will a budget like what we're seeing today that has diminished reserves for the next 2 years do to that credit rating? Or do we have any idea? And then looking beyond that, what if the reserves are not replenished according to what this board adopted in the administrative code, what, 710 million? What will happen then? Or do we know?
Thank you for that question. Supervisor Jacob, I'll start, and Tracy, if there's something you want to add to the end, please feel free to do so. Starting with just the impact in terms of the credit rating. This is something definitely in terms of the draw on reserves that we've looked to. The rating agencies are anticipating this, and more importantly, they're really focused on what we're going to do long-term and how we're going to manage the maintaining of a balanced budget going forward. And as you mentioned, there certainly will be difficult decisions that will need to be made moving forward, because under the worst case scenario, we would use those amounts that we have planned in the second year of the budget, but we're certainly going to be looking to figure out what our new normal looks like as we monitor the pace of the recovery over the next year and prepare for developing the 21-22 budget. We certainly don't expect that there will be a full recovery during that period and even for some many years to come. So certainly operational adjustments will need to be made. So it won't be a surprise to the rating agencies that we don't meet the minimum requirement that is set forth here. Again, the focus is going to be on what we do as a team to manage through these uncertainties and maintaining a discipline of ensuring that we have a structurally balanced budget going forward.
Thank you, Ebony, for that. And I think that's important for the future board, whoever may be on the board, and in dealing with future budgets. When Chairman Cox and I came on the board, it was not a fun time. And it was very, very difficult, very, very tough. And it looks like that is going to be the direction that we will be headed in. So I hope that those who will be on the board making those decisions will remember and do the right thing. I know we have ordinances in place and in order to guide that. And I hope that those are adhered to into the future. The other point is on the road standard, the 70. And what I would like to see, even though I heard Sarah talk about that we'd be retaining the 63 number, not the 70 number, I would like to see the plan at this point, how you're going to get to 70, how long is it going to take to get to 70, and how will you do that? And I also remember that Supervisor Desmond and I brought forward an action which the board approved for some additional money to be put in that pot. And I'd be very interested to see whether or where that money went and how that's being dealt with, or was it backfilled with other money, supplemented? I don't know. Anyway, if I could get answers to that, I would appreciate it. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, I believe Supervisor Gaspar had some questions.
Yes, I had a follow-up question on the gas tax revenues and what that decline may be looking like or projected to be like. Do we have any up-to-date information on what's happening with the gas tax revenue that funds a lot of our overlay projects?
Supervisor Gaspar, the Public Works team works with the statewide organizations and entities, CSAC being one of them, to continuously see where the projections are going to be. And at this point, what we're anticipating is what I've shared with you as it relates to that 19.8 million. However, on a regular basis, we'll continue to receive information from them. It's really going to be a matter of whether, as it relates to some of the reopenings that have occurred, if people are driving more, some of the dynamics that we've faced where that gas tax revenue really has been on that decline. We'll be happy to continue to provide you with the updates. What we do have is the list of roads at this point that would be moving forward for purposes of the improvements. For example, what we had anticipated as far as the 125 miles that we would be able to move forward with the road repairs. With this budget and with that decline, we're going to be going down to 84.25 miles. But we'll be happy to provide that additional information of what the projections are.
Thank you. And I know you've been working hard in collaboration with the Building Better Roads working group. They had some suggestions on how we as a county might be able to group projects better to save money. I'm hopeful that you'll continue working diligently with that Building Better Roads group as we will continue to face these declines in revenue into the future. The other question I had was just for Holly. You had indicated that it does take a year to onboard one of our armed officers. I have a question about why it takes so long. Is there anything that can be done to reduce the amount of time associated with those hires?
I would ask the chief to come down to the chambers to talk a little bit more about the training that's required to onboard officers. But to put it a little bit more succinctly than I did with Vice Chairman Desmond earlier, we don't see this as a problem with the number of budgeted positions within the department. The increase in the post-release community supervision unit as a result of the early release from the state will be temporary because those individuals would have come to us at some point anyway. So if those early releases continue throughout the end of the year, there will need to be a temporary surge of armed officers within that unit for a period of time. That might be 6 months where we need additional officers because the caseload increases. And then as those natural attritions occur, as people leave supervision, the numbers will go back down. So probation is looking at a number of mitigations, including transferring armed officers to that unit that will assist. So Adolfo Gonzalez is here at the podium now.
Is that on? Good morning. Thank you, Supervisor Gaspar. Yes, what we're looking at doing, first of all, the reason it takes about a year to get somebody on board is if you hire someone from the outside, like off the street they call it, put them to an academy, which is a Correctional Deputy Officer Academy, then put them through a field training program. By the time they're able to function on their own, it's about a year. What we're hoping to do is be able to promote from within, for example, a Correctional Deputy Officer 1 or 2, or a senior who can then become a Deputy Probation Officer, and the academy will be shortened. We also have some officers already that participated in the Armed Safety Academy that are working in the institutions that could be candidates. So the time will be shortened.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Very good. Any other questions to staff? If not, we'll proceed into public testimony. My understanding is we have 24 speakers. So if the clerk would go ahead and introduce those speakers. And again, we would remind the speakers to be limited to 3 minutes and try not to be repetitive if you can. All right, we'll go ahead and get going. Andrew, go ahead and call up the first speaker.
Thank you. Excuse. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any members of the public that have requested to speak, please dial into the conference line now using the instructions that were provided to you. Under the board's rules of procedures, members of the public that speak this morning will not be allowed to speak again on Wednesday. For those that have called in, you will be muted until it is your turn to speak. We will be calling speakers by the last 4 digits of their phone number. You'll hear a notification that your call has been unmuted. Each caller will be asked to state their name for the audio record. You will have 3 minutes to address the board. You'll hear this sound when your time is up, so please conclude your comments at that time. We're going to keep speakers to the 3-minute time limit, so please be respectful of other speakers and end your comments when you hear the buzzer. When you're finished speaking, please hang up from the conference line. You may continue to watch or listen to the board meeting online or through the call-in listen line. This information is posted on the Clerk of the Board's webpage at www.sandiegocob.com. I would remind the public speakers that they should mute their TV or live video stream before they begin speaking. We'll begin with the first speaker.
Thank you. Our first speaker is 4681. You may proceed. We will move on to 5192.
Hello, board and staff. Thank you so much. This is Shane Harris, the president, People's Alliance for Justice. Just giving you a call in regard to the Supervisor Fletcher's proposal for an Office of Equity and Racial Justice, which we assisted in getting passed with a new motion by Supervisor Cox. In that motion, it was one of the things that my proposal noted was a $5 million referral to the budget, which we're hearing now. That was passed and that was secured. And so now we're calling and asking in for us to follow up on that plan. It is no secret that the city of San Diego passed a much more robust proposal with more money than Supervisor Fletcher's original proposal. Therefore, we know that it will take a full 5 FTEs and a full office, well-equipped, well-funded, well-established, to really take on inequity across our county, whether it's in policing or whether it's in education or whether it's in child welfare. We know the disproportionality for communities of color is great, and it's going to take a full, well-equipped office to deal with those things. So I'm asking for you today to pass $5 million into the budget for this upcoming year toward the creation of the Office of Equity and Racial Justice. And finally, I'll say that it was also our understanding that the consultant that we asked for in our proposal, which was not in Supervisor Fletcher's proposal, was a consultant that would come in and help develop the full office. My understanding as a Human Relations Commissioner that that did not go through in full, that there was a consultant applied, but it was only for the office's development of a mission statement. I'm asking for you to also add in the consultant piece that it will take to build this office. We need national best practices here. We need a full establishment, and we need a consultant that's skilled in developing these kind of offices, not just to create a mission statement, but to also help build the office. We will need that help. So I'm asking for $5 million delegation to this office's creation. Let's get this done. Let's get it passed. San Diego leads. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is 4356.
Good morning. My name is Yanir Rubalcaba. I'm a resident of District 4 in the County of San Diego.
and I'm calling to demand that the Board of Supervisors continues to defund incarceration and policing, which disproportionately impacts Black and Brown and Indigenous and low-income people of color, and that instead you invest in our communities and in programs that actually keep us healthy and safe, because police and the sheriff are not doing that. They're actually murdering Black, Brown, Indigenous, and low-income people. Some of the actions you can take is to start by defunding the sheriff and to shift to funding healthcare, rental assistance, and COVID assistance. At the very minimum, you should provide free telephone calls for all individuals who are currently incarcerated in county systems. It's ridiculous that incarcerated people are experiencing inhumane medical conditions and they don't even get to make phone calls. We are living through a pandemic and an international disaster, and you need to defund police in order to give communities what they need to be healthy and safe. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is 5700.
Hi, my name is Richard. I'm the director of We the People San Diego. I'm calling in to call out on the budget presentation earlier. When you talk about the public safety department getting the reduction, that is not true, because the only department in that public safety group is getting a reduction in the public safety executive office, and that office is already being funded by Prop 172, which passed in 1993, collecting sales tax to fund the police, the sheriff, the DA, and the correction. Meanwhile, you actually increasing the budget, the funding budget for the DA, which is $22.9 million. During the COVID time, are you prioritizing prosecuting people? The DA department has already gotten more than double the funding compared to the public defender. How about we not increase the funding for the DA and shift some of the funding over to the public defender so that the poor people can have the equal chance adjusted? This is not right. This is not the people budget. How about budget the priority to actually support the people with rental assistance, housing, free phone call for incarcerated folks in the jail when they can't even connect with their family? All of this, you could do better. Let's do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is 3735.
Muted. Good morning. My name is Belen Hernandez, policy advocate with Mid-City CAN and the Peace Promotion Momentum team. I stand with community members advocating for alternatives to youth incarceration. We hear the county statements in support of diversion programs and restorative justice. We need those statements to translate to funding allocations. Please allocate $3 million to fund the permanent countywide restorative community conference program, known as RCC. RCC is a restorative justice program with proven results. In RCC, a trained facilitator leads face-to-face meetings between a youth who committed a harm, the person harmed by the youth's actions, and relevant community members. The youth is led to recognize the impact of their actions and repair the harm. They also receive the adequate support to reintegrate back into their communities. This pilot program, operating in certain zip code areas within San Diego County since 2014, has shown to lower recidivism rates and rehabilitate youth. $3 million is really a small price to pay for a proven program that will keep young people out of jail. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is 4681. We'll move on to 3526. 3526. How about 9205? Or 8510?
Hello, yeah. Hi, my name is Justin Joseph. I'm an Escondido resident. Wanted to say that the will and the voice of the people are clear at this moment in time, and the county budget doesn't fully reflect the will and the voice of the people. The video played at the beginning of this meeting spoke to the values of the budget, showed the stock market several times, which is an insult to our most vulnerable who don't have access to the stock market. It said the county was planning to commit to increased services, then coronavirus happened, which is an insult to our most vulnerable who have been continuing to wait for and still need our help to find prosperity. It said our focus on law enforcement was on training, de-escalation, unconscious bias, which is an insult to the public if the county doesn't ensure that there's accountability around those measures and doesn't ensure transparency, does not force culture change, and does not commit to decriminalizing marginalized communities. Conscious and unconscious racial bias in our policing and prosecution systems are the weapons of systemic oppression. Our system doesn't have the ability to hold public servants accountable for these biases, so we must continue to commit to reducing our exposure to those systems. It's unacceptable that in the midst of a global pandemic and historic economic peril, that we're proposing not just to continue investing in systems of oppression and punitive justice, but we're increasing our investments in them and attempting to paint those investments under the brush of reform. This budget needs to be reevaluated. Increases in funding for police, prosecution, and incarceration must be removed, and we must also find ways to cut these systems. Police, prosecution, and incarceration don't make San Diego safer. They remove funding from things that could make San Diego more prosperous for everyone and therefore safer. I implore the county board to consider and implement the budget priorities of groups such as Invest in San Diego Families Coalition, Mid-City CAN, the People's Alliance, and many others who demand that our budget serve the people. In times when we're distance learning, internet service at no cost should be the standard so low-income students who are already negatively impacted by underfunding and not having access to services don't fall further behind. In times where thousands are out of work by no fault of their own, rent assistance should be our standard. In times where it's clear that police harm communities of color and low-income communities, shifting services that the police provide that could be provided by unarmed service providers with no law enforcement responsibility should be our standard. In times where it's clear that punitive justice ensures recidivism, restorative justice, community support, and real rehabilitation must be our standard. We need a shift to accountability, transparency. We need a shift away from policing and criminalization. And we need to shift to services, support, and correction of historical inequities in San Diego County. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is 9205.
Good morning. My name is Aubrey Yost, and I'm a resident of the city of San Diego. And I'm calling to comment on the proposed budget. I heard some commentary about using the reserves and some concern about that. I can hear that concern. I would just say that this is the biggest public health emergency we've had in over a century. And if there's any time to use the reserves, I think that time is now. I also would urge the Board of Supervisors to redirect funding from the Sheriff's Department and the District Attorney's Office to the Public Defender's Office and to a $5 million for the Office of Equity and Racial Justice. Several studies by KPBS and the ACLU of the Sheriff's Department's own data has demonstrated that the department disproportionately uses force against Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And it also uses higher levels of force against people of color in comparison to white people. This is not a problem that can be fixed just by training, especially when we look nationally at the reoccurring issues, even in police departments that have really prioritized training and community involvement. Instead, I think that we should reimagine public safety and think about how to invest in our communities instead of over-policing and incarcerating. The Board of Supervisors should, at a minimum, fund the Public Defender's Office with at least an equal budget to that of the District Attorney. In addition, the Board of Supervisors should fund the Office of Equity and Racial Justice with $5 million, and as well as creating a transitional age youth unit to prevent and reduce the criminalization of young people in ages 18 to 25. I ask the Board of Supervisors to consider that training and a $1 million symbol to the Office of Racial and Equity is not enough, especially as you hear these community calls for justice and change. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is 2468. We will move on to 7045.
Hi, my name is Kate. I'm one of the nurses at Vista Detention Facility and a member of SEIU. First, I'd like to thank you, Supervisor Fletcher, for standing with us, voting against outsourcing medical staff. I'm disappointed with the outcome of August 4th vote. You might ask, what's the big deal? We're just exploring. Nothing has been decided yet. But I have to ask you, how would you feel if your career were on the line? You can't even promise us our jobs, which is why we have to make some noise, especially during this trying time due to the pandemic. We work ridiculous amount of overtime right now. It's been a chronic issue for years, but was better managed with our previous 4 10-hour shift. We used to also have part-time employees to help out. This year, our schedule was changed and have raked up more overtime than ever. I felt it take a toll on me physically and mentally. We all did, but we persevered because we were promised more staff. Instead, positions are cut, and now you want to outsource. We put facility needs before ourselves so that we wouldn't have to suffer working short staff. Yet, we're scrutinized for working too much overtime or that we don't take enough vacations. But how could we address these issues without proper staffing? We feel guilty for being sick and having to call in. We all deal with stress, guilt, and issues surrounding the pandemic. Now you add job insecurity to the equation. Our morale is low. We have little faith in our leader who does not support us right now. While you explore outsourcing, we're forced to explore other career paths. Although we hope that our job won't be affected as we continue to fight, we cannot leave our future in your mercy. My question to you, does our voice matter right now? Does it matter that we say we need more staff now that you're exploring outsourcing? We're working mandated overtime right now. So does it matter to you what we say? Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is 4681.
Yes, my name is Jermaine, and I actually currently work at George Bailey and part of SEIU member. I, too, have been mandated to work overtime countless times that I've not seen my family. I don't know about you, board members. I know you get to see your families on a daily basis, but me, since I have to support my family and are the breadwinner, I have to make sure not only does my employer have enough staffing, which means that I have to sign up for overtime, to make sure that the inmates who do not have a voice in the matter are taken care of. Also, as a nurse, I must be a patient advocate for my patients. And even though they are incarcerated, they are still my patients. And since they do not hold the voice, I must hold it for them. They obviously are going to be taking care of people that do not care about them, that do not day by day take care of their well-being, even if it's emotional or their medical well-being. We as nurses at these facilities are pretty much the only persons that they take care of. I've seen sworn staff not only belittle them, basically don't hold them anything but, don't feel that they're anything but criminals. The nursing staff, the medical staff at George Bailey are there every single day to support them, to listen to them, vent. So if you don't listen to us, listen to at least them. They are the people we are trying to fight for, not only our jobs, but for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is 7723.
Hello, my name is Sandra Duran. I live and work in District 4, and I'm calling on behalf of Planned Parenthood of the Pacific Southwest. We are calling in support of all of the Invest in San Diego Families Coalition's budget asks, and also in support of an increase to access for menstrual health products in the county. Planned Parenthood and Youth Will are proud to lead this ask with the Invest in San Diego Families Coalition and the over 30 community organizations that have signed up in support of this ask. During these difficult times when our communities, especially low income and especially communities of color, cannot afford to pay rent, cannot afford to pay food, we must pay attention to the fact that they also cannot pay for their basic necessities that impact their health. And this includes menstrual health products. We're asking that the county address this public health issue and provide no-cost menstrual health products at county facilities like county libraries and rec centers. and that they also provide funding for community groups doing food distribution, so that in addition to food, they can also distribute these products at their sites. This is a huge need for our communities, and we ask that you look at this and provide funding for this very vital public health issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is 4025.
Hello, this is Darwin Fishman. I'm speaking on behalf of the Racial Justice Coalition, and we support the work that's being done on the budget and changing the priorities. We are engaged in a campaign right now for asking the district attorney to prosecute or resign, and it's the other side of the coin, which is we already know that the status quo is not working. The way that the police and the sheriffs operate is wonderful for a body count and having a lot of people killed. We see that the San Diego UT has come out saying that in 25 years, there's been over 400 people that have been shot or killed by the police and the sheriff's department. We know we have a horrific history and the police are not accountable. The CLRB and the citizen oversight is not working. The district attorney has prosecuted only one person in the last 25 years. It's time to shift the priorities and not look for the police for our solutions and the sheriff's department, and to put the money into the people that are calling on the front lines, like the healthcare workers and mental health, as a way to solve our county problems. We're asking that you shift your priorities for funding and look for human-centered solutions, and that the ones of using the police to solve homelessness and mental health has been a complete disaster. Too many people have been died, too many people have been injured, and we're asking for a change. And the Racial Justice Coalition will continue to work with others on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is 1400.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gary Scott. I want to thank you for hearing me today. I'm a bit confused by the budget because despite all the board members paying really good lip service to the fact that we're in transformative times and that we're in a situation where we see very clearly how enforcement in the United States generally has gone wrong, we still have in front of us what is very clearly an enforcement budget. The County Board of Supervisors has the opportunity this year, with the backing of so many organizations and so many groups who are presenting mountains of statistics and evidence to show how mitigation and diversion and providing alternatives to prosecution end up costing taxpayers less and preventing people from going to prison and preventing people from getting into a system that eventually ruins their lives and creates so much human misery throughout not only our county, but the entire state and the entire country. We have the opportunity to address that in this budget by funding these diversion programs and funding these alternatives to prosecution and to incarceration and to the inevitable abuses that occur throughout that system. And yet the budget just pays lip service to all of these. We're throwing pennies on the dollar at all these programs that could save lives and save so many taxpayer dollars in the long run. It's like when we don't fund Head Start and therefore people can't get educations and they end up going to jail because they can't find a good job because they haven't gotten the education to get one. And here we have situations where we've got children who end up in the system and they're in it their entire lives at the cost of taxpayers. We could provide them with so many alternatives to that, and we have so many people who want to step up to provide these services. Yet the county says, we're not going to give you the money that you need to do this. We're instead going to give it to police officers and officers of the law, rather, who aren't designed to handle these sort of issues. They are designed to enforce the law. That is their job. I would ask that the Board of Supervisors reevaluate the pennies on the dollar that they are including in this budget for diversion and alternatives to prosecution, and instead rethink the way that they want the law enforced in the county of San Diego. Because right now, this year, with all the attention that's been put on these issues, you have the opportunity to rewrite your legacies in a way that create social justice for people who desperately need it, and create a system that many people will find a lot more justice in. Thank you for my time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is 8248.
Hi, my name is Shay Miller, and I'm a voter and a resident here in San Diego, and I'm calling because I'm wanting to ask the Board of Supervisors, actually, you know what, I shouldn't say ask, I should say demand that they commit to defund the incarceration and policing, which is so disproportionately that impacts, you know, the Black, Brown, and Indigenous, even the low-income people. And they it should be invested in our communities. I suggest that you invest in these resources and programs that can keep us safe, healthy, and just to name a few, we can create a transitional age youth specialization unit. We can invest in social workers who will review cases for the youth between 18 to 24 to determine alternative sentencing. We also can expand Restorative Community Conference, a board focused to repairing harm outside the criminal justice system. We can even provide free telephone calls for all individuals who are currently incarcerated in the county systems. We do need to shut down the George Bailey Detention Center and use those funds to open up a transitional refugee migrant shelter with the community reintegration programs. And in doing so, we can get those funds by defunding the sheriff and shifting those funds to even more things that need to impact us right now, which is healthcare, rental assistance, and anything that has to do with the COVID impact. We can also defund the district attorney and increase the funds for and create a public defender to provide that legal assistance for people who can't afford it. I'm telling you right now, Summer Stephan and Sheriff Gore, they got to resign. It's the only way that we are able to move forward and to be able to get things done. Please listen to all the people who are calling in today, telling you what needs to be done. I urge you to please oppose this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next caller is 8255.
Hi, my name is Jamie Hamilton. I'm a voting citizen of San Diego and a resident of Normal Heights. I oppose any budget increase for the police department or district attorney's department. During these unprecedented times, we need to be allocating as much money as possible to community efforts geared toward housing, healthcare, and other programs that keep us safe and healthy. Policing and incarceration policies disproportionately impact Black, Brown, and Indigenous, and low-income people of color. The already inflated police department took $42.2 million of our COVID budget as a result of the last budget approval process. I ask that the community get these funds, as well as an additional $100 million of the police budget back to invest in our communities. Spending this money on reforming the police department is not a solution. Relying on oversight and additional police training has proven ineffective in preventing racist police policy. This policy is systemic and cannot be changed unless completely dismantled. We must rethink community safety. $5 million to fund an Office of Race and Equality is not enough. I request that you propose to defund the police department by $150 million and start investing in our communities. We could do this by creating the Transitional Age Youth Specialized Unit of licensed social workers who are trained in trauma-informed approaches. We could do this by allocating more money to the public defender. We could do this by freeing up additional resources for community health care, rental assistance, and COVID assistance as we head into this recession. I heard today that we are tapping into significant reserves to implement this budget, and there is a lot of concern as to how we will replace those funds in the future. That concern is very valid. Have you considered how trying to maintain the inflated police budget adds to these complexities? It seems that cutting the police department budget could benefit us all. I really hope you take the time to hear the concerns of every person who called in today and that we have with your budget. Some of us have woken up to some of these issues since the last election, and we will not make the same mistake again if we made mistakes in voting last time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next caller is 9918.
Hi, my name is Michael McDonald, and I reside in District 4. I demand the San Diego County Board of Supervisors commit to defund the millions of dollars to increase incarceration and policing, which disproportionately impacts Black, Brown, and Indigenous and low-income people, and that they invest that money in our communities instead. The proposed budget fails to address the needs of our communities in this historic time. We must start to fund a better future. Our supervisors must invest in the resources and programs that keep us safe and healthy, including creating a transitional age youth specialized unit with county staff trained in youth adult development and trauma-informed approaches to work with youth ages 18 to 25. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next caller is 1116.
Hi, my name is Jamil Cousins, and I'm calling in support of the People's Alliance for Justice regarding the People's Plans for this month's county budget negotiation. Earlier this year, our advocacy efforts through Shane Harris' proposal of Officer Equity and Justice proposed $5 million, referred to the Budget Office's creation, and it happened. So today I'm calling in to voice my support for the $5 million being passed on the budget. We also asked for a consultant to come in and help with the office. We asked for independent counsel to come in and not just, build a mission statement, but someone skilled in national best practices to build the office. Through these times, we have a lot of concerns in the equity office. My main concern would be the disparity in the workforce, which I think leads to income inequality. And this result is a disproportionate impact on Black communities as revealed by the coronavirus pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is 3876.
Hi, my name is Kenny Nguyen, and I would like to beg that San Diego Council members, especially Nathan Fletcher and Greg Cox, to not defund the police. It has been shown that when you defund the police, crime has increased. Vallejo defunded the police brutality and crime increased. Cleveland, before the George Floyd protests, defunded the police and crime increased. Detroit, defunded the police and crime increased. There is this whole stigma that police are killing Black people and Indigenous people indiscriminately. They kill more people than any other race. And I say that's false because it is shown that although police have been shown to use more excessive force on Black people, it's because that they are also ignorant that more Black people are killed by other Black people. In fact, more people are killed by rioters than police right now. And I think that defunding the police is not the answer, because who would the social worker be confident in dealing with an abusive man who's wielding a knife during a domestic violence call? Domestic violence calls have been shown to be extremely violent. Would a social worker be really confident to deal with a crazy person who's wielding a knife? That is not the answer. What is the answer is partnering the police with the social workers, hiring social workers inside the police department. I know that San Diego has a PER team where they hire police to deal with mentally unstable people. I know they've had the police with psychiatrists to deal with mentally unstable individuals or people that need mental help. And for the most part, 90% of the time, the PERT does its job well. What we need to do is hire social workers with the police. Seattle has an LEAD program where they hire people who help deal with drug addicts with the police. And what happened was that drug addicts decreased, like 60% of the Seattle drug addicts rehabilitated when you partner the police with a social worker. So I would like to add we must increase more funding for the police to make police more accountable. We must hire more social workers in the police, create other programs to help deal with drug addicts, like similar to PERT teams, and that we should also increase money for more racially biased training. And I will also want the cop who killed Nicholas Bills to be held accountable. In conclusion, I do not want to defund the police. Please do not defund the police. The police is not a racist system. And the people who say the police is a racist system are ignorant that the Democrats created slavery. They wanted slavery. They wanted the segregation laws. So please, in conclusion, don't defund the police. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next caller is 8990. 8990. 9567.
Hi, my name is Dimitri Booker. I'm a big advocate of economic development in Southeast San Diego, also a resident of Del Cerro, San Diego. I'm calling for two reasons. Number one, to thank Nathan Fletcher for being a leader in our community, and especially since COVID. Number two, I'm calling in support of the People's Alliance of Justice in regards to the People's Plan. The $5 million budget is just a tip of the iceberg of what is needed for this office to be sustainable. So yes, I do agree with hiring the proper consultants, legal, etc. in addition to the $5 million, because the last thing we want to do is we've had a number of scenarios over and over and over, and unless we have something in place to lead us to a better environment, it's going to continue. So $5 million is just a tip of the iceberg. Because what is one person's life worth? And not having this office in place, it scares me. So it's very important to have it in place because of the child welfare, the mental health, behavioral health, all these other items. Public health is a risk right now. Racial injustice is a risk. So we definitely need this office in place. And $5 million should be just the tip of the conversation, because we cannot fix economic development unless we have this office in place. And for Black and brown people like myself, this is very important. That last thing I want to see is my daughters experience what I experienced in my life. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is 0669.
Hi, good morning. My name is Latham Staples. I'm a wealth manager in La Jolla, a business owner, and also a San Diego community activist. And I'm calling in support of the People's Alliance for Justice regarding the People's Plan for your county budget negotiations. Earlier this year, because of the advocacy efforts through the Reverend Shane Harris proposal for the Office of Equity and Racial Justice, which proposed $5 million, referred to the budget for the office's creation, and that happened. So today I'm calling in to voice my support of $5 million being passed in the budget for this office's creation. The People's Alliance for Justice has also asked for a consultant to come in and also to help build this office. We are asking for an independent consultant to come in and not just build a mission statement for the office, but someone skilled in national best practices to help build this office. These are obviously tough times, and they call for courage. We need a strong office that addresses inequity in the areas of child welfare, mental health, behavioral health, also within the county of San Diego, as well as public health and racial injustices of people of color who are often lost, the last people thought about. We don't want a bondage approach to disproportionality, so please pass the $5 million in the county's budget for a fully staffed Office of Equity and Racial Justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is 6665.
Hi, thank you, County Supervisors, especially to my supervisor, Jim Desmond, who probably won't listen, but hey, let's try anyway. I encourage the Board of Supervisors this morning and in the budget process to consider finally defunding the Sheriff's Department in San Diego County. Again, as multiple speakers have pointed out, why in a crisis, in a horrible mental and health crisis, are we trusting the sheriff with millions of dollars of additional funding that the funding from the sheriff has already been wasted on jails that are overridden with diseases, on over prosecution, when we have people dying of COVID in our jails at disproportionate numbers, when we have record suicides in our jails even pre-COVID, when we are disrespecting the transgender population of our jails. It is time that we stop pretending we can reform a system that was founded on slave patrols. We need to start defunding, and yes, working on eventually abolishing the San Diego Sheriff's Department. It is time that we finally acknowledge that the path forward is rehabilitative services, is putting more money into our PERT programs, and for violent offenders, of course, we can keep a small, efficient force around to stop violent offenses. But for all of our nonviolent offenses, it is time that we stop playing lip service to a sheriff's department that has failed the people of San Diego County for its entire existence. A better future is possible, but it starts with at least stopping the increases to the sheriff's department in the budget that is before you right now. Also, I urge you to not fund this pet project of Shane Harris. We need to not fund a small pet project, and we need to put that money instead into more mental health services. Again, putting $5 million into Mr. Harris's pet project is a sham. We have to make sure that we are putting money in effective mental health services instead and stop funding the San Diego Sheriff's Department.
Could you please state your name for the record?
Matthew Corrales, District 5.
Thank you. Our next speaker is 5300.
Hi, my name is Brenda Aguirre, pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm calling from Chicano Federation. I'm calling today to urge you to oppose the budget. I've spent the last couple of weeks listening to our community while assisting in the rental assistance program. I heard the most heartbreaking stories, and our community is really suffering. We need to provide rental assistance for all our tenants. We need to provide mental health services, Office of Youth Affairs, and decrease funds for the Sheriff and DA and fund our community.
We seem to have lost that caller. If that person calls back and wants to continue their testimony, they can. Our next caller is 2061.
Hi, yes, this is Layla.
I'm sorry, we're having a hard time hearing you. Yes, could you please restate your name?
Yes, this is Layla Aziz with Pillars of the Community. I am calling because I want to first give my position on the sheriff outsourcing healthcare and how that's going to affect the budget. I also want to really ask the Board of Supervisors to look at what we're funding, to look at the operational plan, to look at those performance measures. And a lot of those are the reason why we have the problems we have now, the district attorney's performance measures for conviction and for plea bargaining before preliminary. 65% of the people are asked to plea bargain before preliminary. That's the actual goal met, which means that they plea without discovery. And that's why we have innocent people behind bars who basically are railroaded into these harsh sentences. Also, the sheriff, right now during COVID, the jail is about 1,800 people less. And our public safety has actually, we have more public safety. There's less violent crime and property crime compared to this time last year. All we have to do is check on ARGIS. So why are we spending almost $68,000 a year on a bed? And I don't say per detainee because the average detainee is there for about 3 months. But per bed, we're spending $68,000 per year. What conservative on this board is okay with that? And therefore, we have a caller before me who very eloquently stated we don't have housing and youth programs. Look what we're doing with our money. We're putting people in cages for no reason because public safety is actually better now with less people in jail. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Our next speaker is 3526. 3526. You appear to be on mute on your end. Let's try 8990. 8990. We will go to 9792. 9792 appears to have hung up. Those are all the callers on the line right now. I know there were a couple who had tried to call in and their call didn't appear to go through, but that concludes public testimony on this item for now. Chairman Cox.
Very good. Are there any additional comments by my colleagues on the board before we adjourn to Wednesday evening? If there's anybody that called in today that didn't get a chance to speak, they will certainly have that ability on Wednesday at 5:30.
I was just hoping, Chairman, for some clarification by staff. It doesn't have to happen today, but Wednesday. It was my understanding when we formed the office and got the consultant engaged, the consultant's full role wouldn't be just in the development of a mission statement, but rather the first task would be to meet with the group, develop that mission and vision, and ultimately be working with that office to develop, or working with that commission to develop the framework for the office. I had brought up, we weren't real clear at the time whether the recommendation on the number of employees was appropriate, that sort of thing. So I just need to have a better understanding of how we're going to engage with this consultant and how they'll be involved with the development of the office in conjunction with the commission.
Supervisor Gaspar, this is Tom Montgomery. We went back and watched the video of the meeting just to be sure, and the motion that was made was to hire the consultant to create a mission statement. It was limited to that. So the action that was voted on by your board, as clarified by the chairman at the time, was simply to hire a consultant to create a mission statement.
Okay, that's my understanding of what the initial task would be. I just felt like there was more context within the conversation that took place at that meeting. And I don't know if that needs to be revisited with the board or if I'm alone in my understanding of the consultant's involvement. I just felt as though that was the initial task, but not the full scope of the consultant. I can't imagine hiring a consultant just to develop a mission statement. That seems like not a real good use of time or money. But that's, my perspective as a board member who was present participating in that meeting.
Well, there was a lot of discussion, but the final motion that was made and acted upon by the board had it simply as to develop a mission statement.
Okay, are there further questions or comments? Seeing none, I'm going to ask Andrew to kind of walk us through what happens from here. We're going to go to the Wednesday meeting at 5:30, but I know that there's a number of steps in the process before we close the public portion of our budget deliberation. So, Mr. Potter, would you go ahead and walk us through those steps?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This concludes oral public testimony in the budget today. The board will reconvene on Wednesday, August 12th at 4:30 p.m. in closed session to consider those matters listed under item 2 on today's agenda. The board will then reconvene in open session at 5:30 p.m. to receive additional oral public testimony on the budget. Members of the public may still provide written testimony in the budget. To comment online on the budget, please visit the county's website at www.sandiegocounty.gov/budget. Testimony must be in writing and be received no later than the close of budget hearings, which is Wednesday, August 19th, 2020 at 5 p.m. All materials received will be distributed to the board, the Chief Administrative Officer, the Office of Financial Planning, and placed in the public record. Change letters from board members and the Chief Administrative Officer are also due to the Clerk of the Board by the close of the budget hearings on Wednesday, August 19th, 2020 at 5 p.m. Law precludes the clerk from accepting change letters after the deadline. All change letters received will be distributed to the board, the Chief Administrative Officer, the Office of Financial Planning shortly after that 5 p.m. deadline. Budget deliberations and adoption are scheduled for Tuesday, August 25th, 2020 at 2 p.m. Mr. Chairman, at your request, this meeting is adjourned until Wednesday, August 12th at 4:30 p.m. for the board's closed session, then 5:30 p.m. for the budget hearing.
Seeing no other questions or comments from my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors, I'll declare this meeting adjourned. And again, we will reconvene at 5:30 on Wednesday, August 12th. This meeting is adjourned.